Hi there. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here. And so I have two answers. The first one is a mnemonic prop. Some of you have seen me work with props over the years. So I'll leave them here. Those are my shoes, because from 50 plus years as a journalist, I want to share the main takeaway I've learned about trying to understand the world, which is put yourself in other people's shoes. Two, I have 7 grandkids. How many of you have grandkids? People can't see, but yell out how many of you have grandkids. Yeah. All right, well, there you go. I know my audience. Then you, like me, are desperate for them to survive and prosper. As EP, that's the nickname of my 14-year-old who I'm taking to Sarasota on Monday, proudly says of his nickname, EP, he's my evolutionary purpose. Which cuts both ways, by the way, because you can't deny him anything. And your grandkids are yours. So what I'm about to do is a dark talk written just for this purpose. I've never given it before and probably will never give it again. That ends with a glimmer of hope and at least some small suggestion of what you can do to help our grandkids avoid apocalypse. Now, I apologize that I'm going to be reading, so my head will be down a lot of the time, because if I ad lib, I'll go on forever and we'll never have time for questions. As you know, I'm a TV journalist, a TV reporter who lives on economic anecdata, sometimes with a slight smile. But luckily, instead of talking about China, I decided to exploit Matt Storan's invite to indulge in a stone-sober, big picture, macro view. It's because I've been perseverating about what I call the 6 horsepersons of the apocalypse that threatened the world to which we had long become so comfortably accustomed. Since the one that ties all the horsepersons together, I'm going to argue, is the topic of this conference, globalization. I'll keep visuals to a minimum on the theory that if power corrupts, PowerPoint can corrupt absolutely. The 6 horsepersons are: 1, exponentially increasing destructive power per person; 2, the decline of men; 3, ever more rapidly morphing technology; 4, greater status and wealth inequality, which is certainly part of this conference and reasons behind it; 5, a little quirkier, the congenital monsters of the id, roused and now unshackled by all of the above; and finally, what prompted me to take this tack in a conference on trade, the jarring transition from clan to contract, what's been called the Great Transformation, and the too quick transformation, from gift-based local economies to a market-based global economy that has now, I conjecture, finally let its fearsome stablemates out of the barn. All right, 1, there are my horsepersons. 1, destructive power per person. Autonomous drones, engineered epidemics, nuclear conflagration being via conventional or artificial intelligence, which you may remember, movie Terminator 1, depicted back in the 1980s, and of whose advent Henry Kissinger warned just back in December, during Advent. 2, the declining role of men. The typical male U.S. worker now earns $2,500 less on an inflation-adjusted basis than he did in 1975. And as a recent Boston Fed study reminds us, quote, a job not only offers financial security, especially to men, it also affirms their status, which is tied to their relative position, to their age peers, and to many social outcomes. Meanwhile, college wage premium has grown dramatically. And women now outnumber men in both undergraduate and graduate degrees in this country. Within 5 years, it's estimated, America will graduate 2 women from college for every man. Paper beats rock, brains beat brawn. And look at the reaction to female advance in parts of the developing world. In Afghanistan, where girls are no longer allowed to attend even elementary school. In Iran, in Jordan Peterson, or stateside, the banning of the Handmaid's Tale in Texas. Okay, Texas. And Oregon. And then there's America's incel movement, the involuntarily celibate. Young men who've actually named themselves after the fact that they can't get anyone to sleep with them. According to a recently reported survey, as many of you may have read in the New York Times this past week, almost 30% of men under 30 in this country hadn't had sex for at least a year in 2021, the last year they counted, a figure that has tripled since 2008. And linking this back to destructive power per person, how about the gun industry aiming directly at low-status young men once hunting gun sales fizzled? Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But how many children in the U.S., let's go back. How many children in the U.S. have endured a shooting at a K-12 school since 1999? 338,000. In 366 separate incidents. Trigger invariably pulled by a young man. Now, no argument with those who say that good riddance to the end of male domination, as I for a long time joked when helping a woman with her bag on an airplane. We men are really good for just 2 things, diversifying the gene pool and taking luggage off of overhead compartments. But hey, I can afford humility. I have a job, some cachet, a loving wife, 7 grandkids, and after all, you invited me here, not some young incel. Horsepersons 3, the frustrations of technological change. Just think how you feel when you confront someone else's TV remote control, or even your own. Then imagine what it's like for the bulk of Americans who haven't had the exposure to sophisticated technology that so many of us have had, or the education, not to mention, because you're not supposed to mention, the smarts. And for those of you who have played with ChatGPT, just imagine its potential for widening the gap, while also threatening the relevance of more and more of the younger of us who could fall from here to there in a heartbeat, maybe the biggest fall economically in the history of the US. Greatest distance. Okay. 4, very closely related, rising inequality in general, breeding anxiety and sometimes fury in a world that had been expecting just the opposite. Developed world's inequality gap shrank for half a century or more until somewhere around 1980, countries like ours, and ours particularly, then began to widen yawningly. Its strictly economic effects have actually been exaggerated by the left, ignoring substantial government redistribution, if not very effective redistribution. It's more like disability payments than it is job retraining. But the psychic effects might be understated, as folks like many of us have risen in comfort and status. I used to joke privately that they think we think they're stupid. They are right, and we're right. Always got to laugh. But that's because it was an audience like you. Imagine if it weren't. 5th and last, the monsters of the id. Many of you know Steve Pinker's rosy prognosis and data that our better angels have prevailed and never has the earth been so civilized. Now, I don't know how to quantify the recent horrors in Ethiopia, Haiti, Afghanistan, and elsewhere compared to the past, and more refugees fleeing and sometimes drowning worldwide. But even here at home, as you just heard, in fact, the suicide rate is up, although I can give you the numbers, it's up 30% since 2000. Drug overdose deaths up almost 500% over the same 20 years. Life expectancy actually down recently and after rising for centuries. So consider putting Pinker in long-range perspective with Sigmund Freud's 1930 essay, Civilization and Its Discontents. His argument, in brief, civilization and therefore civility both entail repression, and the human animal can tolerate just so much repression for just so long. 1930. And today, QAnon, January 6th, Brexit, Brazil, Peru, Israel. Maybe Pinker's data marked civilization's civility and the rule of law's high tide. But what connects these 5 apocalyptic horsepersons to this conference, as I've said, is the 6th, the plate tectonic shift from clan to contract. That shift has been in progress for centuries, has produced boosters and denouncers, of course. On the one hand, as we keep hearing, it's the standard explanation for global prosperity. On the other hand, it reduced human relations to cash payment and naked interest, as Karl Marx howled, making all that is solid go up in air. Fact is, the great transformation has picked up speed big time over the past 40 years or so. I completely agree with David that the speed of change, and famous guy who coined the term the Great Transformation made a big point of this about almost 100 years ago. It's been an acceleration in the stunning sea change from clan-based societies ruled by family ties, ascribed roles, mutual obligation, the so-called gift economies, with embedded sacred norms, which the majority of societies in the anthropological record have relied upon forever since the record started, to the profane, arm's-length, impersonal, contract-based, transactional arrangements that are the creative destruction backbone of globalization and trade. But during those last 40 years, what else has been happening? And you've heard a lot about this, the reaction. And you've seen a lot about it. And now a world plausibly in the early stages of disaggregation, deglobalization, or at least slowbalization, disintegration. Granted, there's a vigorous debate, and we've heard it here, about whether this is or isn't the end of globalization. Certainly, I think the consensus is not the end. But the reaction against globalization is clear enough to someone like me, who's been hearing about its negative effects since at least the 1980s. I went to lunch and my job went to China, as one dispirited interviewee in his 50s said. Another in his 40s, defending government support for building a battleship he acknowledged was already completely obsolete, retrained me for what? As my eminent predecessor, David Autor, has helped document, it's arguable that Donald Trump was put over the top by disaffected families in the just about rusted out Rust Belt whose jobs had indeed gone to China. Or as the marginally employed brother of a PBS NewsHour executive producer articulated his support for Trump a few years ago, he's an asshole, but he's our asshole. The celebrity winner who champions the uneducated, the losers. And what's worse than being a loser? Which, despite its net advantages, as you've heard over and over again, trade has by the barrelful. So with rising wages in China, increasing dangers to supply chains, including COVID and other viruses, why not, from their point of view, bring it all back home, from just in time to just in case? And if you think mastery of complexity in an ever more complex world is controlled by fewer and fewer elites, why isn't faith in almost any alternative, perhaps the blinder the better, a sensible adaptation? Plus, you get to make America great again. I had a guy in a cab once in New York. I said, "You from Serbia?" He said, "Serbia #1. Right. Sadly, we all know the awful truth, the fatal consequences of tribal allegiance, Hatfield versus McCoy, Shark versus Jet, Hutu Tutsi, Serb Croat, Christian Muslim, Protestant Catholic, Sunni Shia, my family, clan, sect, gang, party, God, country, right or wrong. Case for globalization is in-your-face obvious. Starvation, relative rarity, life expectancy double. We drink better wine than the kings of England or France did, but again, who is the we? Comparatively speaking, we elders in this room, and pretty much everybody we know or have intimate truck with, we give or take a few of us, since I don't know you all, are the meritocracy sociologist Michael Young warned of in the 1950s when he coined the word as a pejorative. We're the beneficiaries of what Harvard professor Michael Sandel calls the tyranny of merit at the expense of the common good. We're the ones who know what a fine wine is, or pretend to. As revealed in the famous Whitehall study of the English civil service some years ago, for every 25% hop up the status ladder, which is, in our country, G2, G3, G4, something like that, holding constant obesity, drinking, smoking, pay, get 2.5 extra years of life. For all their professed values, the meritocrats like us are the dissers, they the dissed. Even you in college, here from Orono, facing costs and career uncertainty fewer, if any of us ever did, are an elite minority. And what's the quite reasonable response of the non-elite? To band together with all other losers and say, hey, we're stronger enough that you all will wind up being the losers after we're finished with you. Okay, that's the easy part. The proud January 6th boys seem pretty obvious victims of globalization and concomitantly of the other 5 horsepersons. Should it surprise us that they default to tribe and clan identity? But what about our crowd? Why are we, the beneficiaries of globalization, defaulting to clan identity, defined by our disdain, however tacit, for globalization's uneducated losers here in this country, and their values, brandishing our own vocabulary proscriptions, our own pronouns, our own definitions of gender, and so on? We think it's because we are enlightened, better educated, more caring, just plain smarter. Hey, the average IQ is 100 by definition. For everyone we know with an IQ of 130, say, there's an American with an IQ of 70. Only about 1/3 of Americans get a 4-year college degree. No wonder President Trump loves the uneducated. And of course, we're inclusive. And of course, I buy like that, a lot of that. I'm very much like you. But maybe we're also defaulting to group identity because we, too, are victims of the transactional contract economy as our mobile kids move away, absconding with our grandchildren, who themselves are deracinated and reportedly far more anxious than before. And maybe we're scared too, scared of the losers and what they might do, of course, but also scared because we're subject to the same agents of the apocalypse, from the password quagmire, two-step verification, to myriad remotes forever sprouting streaming services. This is true. I'm in this fancy hotel here. I could not get the shower to work this morning. It's not like I didn't try. There were so many, I gave up after splashing myself with cold water, but it was insane. And I thought, oh my God, it's my speech. To the tech disruption that has graphic designers up against rivals like DALL-E and Midjourney, which between them generated all my slides so far within seconds. Pros and code writers up against ChatGPT, teachers no longer knowing if a paper is written by a person or a machine. And furthermore, as a conservative historian professor friend of mine who teaches at Harvard Business School suggested after reading the first draft of this speech, there have been many since, particularly after listening to everybody and just throwing away pages. It may also be because we may be driven by 2 other emotions as well: guilt and denial. Guilt because we elders know we're the beneficiaries, and that isn't fair, isn't consistent with our values, and that we aren't about to give away our benefits. In fact, do everything we can to amplify them for our kids and grandkids. Sarasota. So, said my friend, quote, we take out our guilt as anger towards those less fortunate, anger disguised as self-righteousness, and then denial, despite being the privileged. We also believe that somehow we're the weaker, threatened, anti-status quo insurgent party, while they think we're the elites who run the country, if not the world. One final and most important thought, one I promised in the beginning. How might we counteract, and the reason I came here, by the way, is to share this thought. Besides the fact that Matt asked me and I didn't know how to say no. How might we counteract the devolution to parochialism and the even greater odds of catastrophe that would bring with it? Because while globalization may have let the horsepersons out of the barn, if we're slouching towards a neo-Hobbesian world of all against all, then they threaten to be even more apocalyptic than they are at the moment. Now look, short term, I'm a Baba Ram Dass, be here now optimist. I love my life. Long term, as you know by now, I'm an apocalyptic pessimist. But it's a probabilistic universe. Anything's possible. And then there are the grandkids. So while thinking globally, I'm acting locally. Just a few years ago, and I think I'm going to have to run through some slides to get this was showing you what it's like now if you're a young person reading these things. Looks, feels, and operates just like mom and dad's gun. Natural enhancement. This is Donald Trump's Son's magazine. Really. Here's it's Daniel Defense. You can see up above. They tweeted this out. Look at that. They tweeted it out on May 16th, 2022. Then there was a killing in Uvalde 8 days later. And then this is gun porn, as you'll see underneath. That's another ad on the internet. But this is where I was going. Thinking globally, acting locally. So with a few years ago, a former student of mine and I've done some teaching on this side, started a devoutly nonpartisan, non-political, nonprofit, the American Exchange Project. On Zoom, we introduce high school seniors, rural and urban, well-heeled and not, red and blue, from all over this land, and then send them to each other's completely different communities to embed for a week in the summer after they graduate, completely for free. An adventure in America, see the other America. 20 kids in 4 communities in 2021, because we were laid low the first year by COVID. Texas, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Palo Alto. 102 kids in 29 communities in 22 states last July. We're particularly heavy in Idaho and Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota. More than 400 seniors signed up for this summer, 55 communities, 35 states. In a decade or more, we pray, may be an option for all of America's 4 million annual high school seniors if we can raise the money for the plane tickets. Our premise that humans have far more in common than what divides us or them. Pretty much everyone has the capacity to respect and bond with the other. That it isn't that hard to bring out the Romeo and Juliet in each of us, even in this overwhelming globalized world where the horsepersons of the apocalypse ride. And it's particularly true of people the age of Romeo and Juliet, Tony and Maria, teenagers. And we're proving it in both senses of the word. Just Google or Bing or ChatGPT, the American Exchange Project, to judge for yourself. If human society is always a dynamic tension between the impulse to cooperate, love, care for the other, and the impulse to predate, pursue your own self-interest, everything else be damned. And any community can find itself in either. Think Northern Ireland or Ireland, Rwanda or Sarajevo or every sectarian conflict on record. Then the key to survival is nurturing the cooperative. Or to frame what we're trying to do in another way, we're trying to cultivate quietly the sacred that connects us all and harness the horse persons of the apocalypse as best we can. Find us online. Then connect us to I should show some of these. That's where we are. That's who we are. That's some of our kids. It's on the website. It's very programmatic as to what you can do. And that you can see us in the Rocky Mountain states. We're extremely diverse, but it's just happenstance. We're all comers, any comers at all. And then these are, in each community, there's a beloved high school teacher with whom we connect whatever way we can, who then we pay $5,000 to recruit students and to manage the week in that community. So connect us to a high school anywhere in America. Maine, I've heard Maine, Connecticut, a whole bunch of places, mainly in the Northeast here. But take it seriously. Join one of our online alumni reunions to meet some of the kids. You'll have to let me know about that. Well, or you can, I guess you can go to the website, but for anybody who wants to know, my name's in the program there. It's paul.solman@gmail.com, very simple. And tell me if you want to do that. Help support us or persuade your billionaire friends to. Check out similar projects like Braver Angels, if you like, or Weave Project, or One Small Step. Put yourself in other people's shoes, even the deplorables. Do something, however small, because why not? And don't we have to do something? Thank you.